History is written by the victors. But what happens when the victors are monsters? What happens when those who wear the crown destroy more than they preserve? Welcome to a journey into the darkest chapters of humanity. Today, we venture to where power descends into madness, where rulers instilled fear and terror in their people and changed the world forever. From Nero to Mao Zedong, from Rome to China, these names stand for unimaginable suffering, for tyrants whose decisions cost millions their lives. But were they truly just monsters? Or were they products of their time, their power, and their fears? Imagine, you live in a world where a single wrong word, a mere glance, can cost you your life. This is the reality these rulers created. A world filled with fear and blood. This journey will shock you, unsettle you, and make you think. But be warned, this is not for the faint-hearted. After the introduction, we delve into the cruelty that wrote history. Imagine you are a simple citizen in ancient Rome. Your world is crumbling, literally. The fire that consumes the city not only destroys your home, but also extinguishes your hope. All that remains is fear and the suspicion that your emperor is responsible. Nero, the infamous emperor, is often accused of starting the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. Whether this is true remains unclear, but one thing is certain: his handling of the disaster was brutal. He made the Christians scapegoats and had them executed in the most horrific ways. Imagine people being burned alive, their screams silenced by the crackling flames, all to divert attention from Nero's guilt. But that was only the beginning. Nero also had his mother Agrippina murdered after she had once helped him to power. He staged an alleged accident, but when that failed, he had her stabbed to death by soldiers. Even his wife, Poppaea, was not safe. In a fit of rage, he kicked her to death while she was pregnant. Nero's madness knew no bounds. He built himself a golden palace that overshadowed Rome and forced the citizens to worship him like a god. But in the end, he was betrayed by his own people. He fled impoverished and alone, and took his own life with the words, "What an artist dies with me." Caligula, the third emperor of Rome, began his reign with hope, but it ended in madness and bloodshed. Initially loved by the Romans, a severe illness seemed to change him. From then on, he became unpredictable, cruel, and deeply perverse. Imagine living in Rome and being subject to the whims of your emperor. A day that began with generosity could end in a mass execution. Caligula forced parents to watch the executions of their children. He had his enemies tortured, mutilated, and eventually killed, often without reason. Yet Caligula's cruelty was also bizarre. He declared himself a god, had enormous statues of himself erected, and forced senators to worship him. His favorite horse, Incitatus, was appointed consul, while Roman nobles were humiliated. Madness also reigned in his private life. He abducted women, raped them publicly, and indulged in incestuous relationships. His palace became a symbol of decadence, but his end came abruptly. His own guards, exhausted by his tyranny, murdered him. A bloody end for a bloody emperor. Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible, was Russia's first Tsar and perhaps its most brutal ruler. His childhood was marked by violence and mistrust, and when he seized power, Russia became his playground of terror. His oprichniki, a secret police force, became his instrument of fear. Dressed in black robes and adorned with skull emblems, they spread terror and death. They tortured, mutilated, and murdered thousands, often on mere suspicion from Ivan. Entire villages were wiped out, such as in the massacre of Novgorod, where thousands perished because Ivan believed the city was plotting treason. Yet his cruelty did not spare his own family. In a fit of rage, he struck his own son to death, an act that allegedly drove him to madness. Imagine a ruler with power over an entire nation, yet unable to control himself. Ivan died alone, surrounded by the chaos he had created. Vlad III, known as Vlad the Impaler, was not just a ruler, but a living nightmare. His name became legendary, and his deeds inspired the figure of Dracula, and for good reason. Vlad's preferred method of punishing enemies was impalement. Imagine being impaled alive on a wooden stake that slowly pierces your body, enduring hours, sometimes days of agony before dying. Vlad had entire forests of stakes erected to display his power and cruelty. Yet his brutality was not confined to enemies alone. Traitors, peasants who could not pay their taxes, and even women who displeased him became victims of his bloody reign. His aim was to achieve absolute control through fear, and he succeeded. Vlad's name remains a symbol of unimaginable cruelty. Vlad's reign ended as violently as it began. In the year 1476, he was killed by Ottoman soldiers during a battle. His head was severed and sent to Constantinople to prove his death. But his legend endures, and the terror he spread still echoes today. Leopold II, King of the Belgians, embodies colonial brutality. Under the pretext of civilizing the Congo, he turned the country into his personal possession. His goal was not progress, but profit, at any cost. The inhabitants of the Congo were enslaved to harvest rubber and ivory. Imagine being forced to traverse dense, dangerous forests for hours, your hands bleeding from the labor. And if you failed to meet the demanded quotas, you were mutilated. Hands, feet, not even children were spared from the violence. Entire families were murdered. Villages burned to the ground. Leopold disguised his atrocities as philanthropy. He presented himself in Europe as the enlightener of Africa, while in the Congo, up to 15 million people perished. His regime was marked by unimaginable brutality, leaving deep scars that persisted for decades after his death. Leopold II died in 1909 in Brussels, peacefully, in wealth, and without ever being held accountable for his actions. But the truth about the Congo emerged, and his name today stands as a symbol of the horrors of colonialism. Pol Pot, the leader of the Khmer Rouge, aimed to transform Cambodia into a classless, agrarian paradise, but his dream turned into a nightmare for millions. Under his rule, cities were evacuated, money was abolished, and religion was banned. Imagine being forced to leave your home and relocate to a labor camp. No food, no medical care, only hard labor, starvation, and despair. Over 2 million people perished from exhaustion, disease, and systematic executions. The killing fields became a symbol of this horror. People were killed with simple tools to save ammunition. Children were forced to watch their parents being murdered or to denounce them themselves. Pol Pot's regime destroyed not only lives, but also the soul of an entire nation. After the Vietnamese invasion in 1979, Pol Pot was overthrown and fled into the jungle. He lived in hiding for years until he was arrested by his own followers in 1997. In 1998, he died, allegedly of a heart attack, before he could be held accountable for his crimes. Idi Amin Dada, the self-proclaimed conqueror of the British Empire, was one of Africa's most brutal dictators. His 8-year reign over Uganda was marked by violence, chaos, and bizarre eccentricity. Amin carried out ethnic cleansing, particularly against the Acholi and Lengo peoples. Estimates suggest that up to 500,000 people died under his regime. Dissidents were brutally tortured, often in front of running cameras. Rumors circulated that Amin practiced cannibalism and kept the heads of his enemies as trophies. His unpredictability made him not only dangerous, but also bizarre. He offered himself as the King of Scotland and declared himself the Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the sea. Amin embodied a tyrant who terrorized his people and flaunted his power. In 1979, Amin was overthrown by a Tanzanian invasion. He fled to Libya and later to Saudi Arabia, where he lived in exile. He died in 2003 in Jeddah, peacefully in a hospital, an end starkly contrasting with the atrocities he had committed. Adolf Hitler, the Führer of the Third Reich, unleashed a wave of terror that forever changed the world. The Holocaust, the systematic genocide of 6 million Jews and millions of other victims, is one of the darkest chapters in human history. Hitler's regime created concentration camps where people were stripped of their identity, exploited, and brutally murdered. Imagine being herded into a cattle car, not knowing where you are going. At the destination, hunger, torture, and death await you. Yet Hitler brought not only death to Germany, but to the entire world. His blitzkrieg campaigns devastated Europe, and World War II cost over 70 million lives. He ruled through propaganda, fear, and hatred, a dictator whose ideology brought death and destruction. On April 30th, 1945, as the Allies closed in on Berlin, Hitler took poison and shot himself in his bunker. His body was burned to prevent it from being displayed. His death marked the end of the Third Reich, but the scars he left behind are still visible today. Joseph Stalin reigned with an iron fist over the Soviet Union. His brutal purges claimed the lives of millions, ranging from political dissidents, peasants, and intellectuals to innocent civilians. Stalin established an expansive network of forced labor camps, the gulags, where countless perished under inhumane conditions. His policies of forced collectivization precipitated the catastrophic famine in Ukraine, the Holodomor, which saw millions succumb to starvation. No one was safe. He governed through terror, surveilling his people and fostering an atmosphere of pervasive mistrust. Imagine inhabiting a world where a single misspoken word could seal your fate. In 1953, Stalin succumbed to a stroke, isolated in his quarters. His death offered no redemption for his victims, yet his regime left behind a harrowing legacy of fear that would cast its shadow over the Soviet Union for decades to come. Mao Zedong, the founder of the People's Republic of China, sought to transform his country into a socialist utopia, but his vision led to one of the greatest human catastrophes in history. Mao was a man of grand ideas, yet his methods were brutal, ruthless, and disastrous. The Great Leap Forward, his campaign to rapidly industrialize China, forced millions of peasants to abandon their fields to produce steel in primitive backyard furnaces. The consequences were devastating. Agricultural production collapsed, and one of the worst famines in human history swept the land. An estimated 45 million people perished between 1958 and 1962, starved, weakened by disease, or brutally executed by Mao's regime for being deemed enemies of the revolution. Imagine living in a small village. Your family has nothing left to eat, and the few provisions you have are seized by the party to secure the alleged successes of the revolution. Despair sets in, and each day becomes a struggle for survival. Yet Mao's horrors did not end with the famine. In the 1960s, he launched the Cultural Revolution, a radical campaign to destroy everything old: customs, culture, habits, and ideas. Mao ruled China with a blend of propaganda, fear, and an almost divine cult of personality. His portrait adorned every home, and his words were revered as sacred scriptures. Yet behind the facade of the great leader lay a man who sacrificed millions of lives on the altar of his ideology. Mao Zedong died in 1976 in Beijing from the consequences of a heart attack, surrounded by followers who worshipped him as a demigod until the very end. However, his death did not bring a swift end to China's suffering. The scars of his reign ran deep, both in the souls of the people and in the shattered society and culture of the nation. Following his death, reforms began that gradually steered the country in a new direction. Yet the Mao era remains one of the most horrifying in China's history. To this day, his actions divide the nation. To some, he is a hero. To others, a tyrant whose vision cost millions their lives. The question persists: was Mao a revolutionary seeking to guide his country into a new era? Or was he merely a dictator whose lust for power brought untold suffering? The rulers we have discussed are long gone. Their palaces crumble. Their empires no longer exist, but the wounds they left behind are still felt. Millions of innocent lives were sacrificed. Entire nations suffered under their tyranny. We thank you for joining us on this dark journey. It has been an emotional roller coaster. Anger, sorrow, perhaps even disbelief. But we hope you take away one thing: the memory of what happens when power is abused. History teaches us what occurs when we fail to pay attention. It shows us that we must never take our freedom, our dignity, and our humanity for granted. If you enjoyed this journey, or if it sent a shiver down your spine, leave us a comment. Which of these stories resonated with you the most? And which other dark chapters of history would you like us to explore for you? Thank you for watching. Until next time, in the deep shadows of history. Subscribe to our channel to discover more stories from the darker side of history.